Hello everyone, welcome to this session. And today I'm going to talk about Windows application consistency. It's pretty deep. We're going to try to dive. Maybe not that deep, because actually you'll see that VSS is pretty, let's say, complex, not complicated, but complex. And it's a 12-minute session, so we'll try to give you the right knowledge so you can understand how it works. So first things first, my name is Pierre Francois Guglielmi. Back a few slides. And as you can probably hear, I'm French and based in France. I work at Rubrik as a field technologist, and I have a background with customer experience, a lot of vendor experience as well, and distributor. I have various certifications on VMware especially, but also on Azure or Windows Server. And when I'm not working, you might find me doing CrossFit. All right. So this is the agenda. We'll cover the basics of VSS, what it is, really, how it works, what are the components. And then I'll talk about what Rubrik does with this, how it works, how we leverage the VSS framework, basically. So back to basics. Usually, when I used to see customers and talk with them, and even partners, and we're discussing Windows application consistency using the VSS framework, most of them are like, when I ask, do you know VSS? They're like, yes, of course I do. Everybody knows VSS. But as soon as you try to discuss some issues, for example, when there's a volume shadow copy that did not happen, there was an error or something like that, and you want to try to understand what happened. And then you ask them, all right, so are you okay with the framework and the different components and who does what with VSS? And as soon as you ask this question, it's more like they're usually clueless about really how it works. So basically, the VSS is an entire framework, but it comes with a service, a Windows service, which is the volume shadow copy service. This is what VSS stands for. According to Microsoft, this comes from the Microsoft documentation. It's a set of COM APIs that implements a framework, like I said, to allow volume backups, specifically, to be performed while applications on the system continue to write to the volumes. That means that we're talking about online backup. We don't have to stop anything. We don't have to stop the service delivered by the applications in order to do a backup. And so it provides different components and interface, and there's this service that coordinates everything between the different components that we're going to talk about a little bit. So this is source. So about the components, basically there is this Windows service that you can see in the services console, right, on Windows. That's the volume shadow copy service. It should be enabled. It should be configured as automatic. It's not running always. It's just started when it has to do something. Okay, but it should be enabled. Then you have requesters. The requesters are basically the components, or is the component that, well, requests a volume shadow copy. That's that easy. And when doing this, the requester will be able to sort of question, if you will, the application writers. So the writers in the framework are components that will be responsible for making sure that the applications that are running will actually quiesce in a consistent state, which means that no transaction or incoming I/O or anything in memory or in a buffer or in a cache is lost during the operation. So if buffers or caches have to be flushed to disk, or if in-memory transactions have to be committed, then this is the role of the writers to do this. Okay? They are preparing the applications for online backup. And once everything has been prepared, then the request to create the actual volume shadow copy is done through the service. And this is the role of the provider. The provider is the component that interacts with everything that is related to disk. Okay, and the volume shadow copy is basically a volume operation. So there are different types of providers. There's a default one, which is the system provider. It comes with Windows and with the VSS service. There are some hardware providers when you want to sort of offload these tasks to a storage array, for example. Or you can have some software providers that are provided by third-party vendors. So, quick question, quick quiz. Do you know what components are provided by what, basically? So, volume shadow copy service, I told it's provided by Windows, right? Requesters, do you have any idea? No. It's basically the backup application that provides the requester, okay? Writers, easy. The applications themselves. So for example, for a SQL Server, the SQL Server writer is provided and installed with SQL Server at the same time. The system provider is provided by Windows again. It's actually, it comes with the VSS service. Hardware provider by the array vendor, and the software providers by third-party vendors like us, for example, Rubrik. All right. So specifically for vSphere virtual machines running a Windows guest operating system, what can you do? How can you trigger and leverage the VSS framework? There are basically two different methods. You can just leverage the VMworld tools. They have to be installed. Okay. So there are advantages and disadvantages in doing this. Basically, the pros are that usually they are installed within virtual machines, so they are there. There's nothing more to deploy. It does not require a direct connection between the backup software and the virtual machines, because actually the VIX API can be leveraged. And it can do some application-consistent snapshots. But actually, there are some disadvantages with this. The first thing is that the version of the VMworld tools have to be current. If your VMworld tools are not up to date, it doesn't work. And unfortunately, it's not always easy to keep everything up to date. Second thing is that you will require some guest OS credentials to provide to the backup software so it can leverage the VMworld tools. Third thing, and that's really a pain point, Windows user account control has to be disabled. And that's not really a best practice from a security perspective, unfortunately. It's not always, or not really, not exactly application aware. It can be application consistent, but application awareness is something different. It's not only about having a consistent state, but it's going a step further and handling things like, you know, transaction logs, truncation, things like that, and more. And one of the biggest issues with that is that usually there are timeout issues. And the second approach is a proprietary approach. So your backup vendor provides something to leverage the VSS framework within the virtual machines. In that case, there's a much greater success rate, much greater, because we have the entire control. It provides application consistency and awareness, so lock truncation and things like that. It does require to deploy something within the virtual machine. It's some sort of agent, but you'll see that it's not a big deal. And it usually requires some firewall ports to be open in the Windows firewall. Okay. So what Rubrik does is that there are different levels of consistency. We don't do the inconsistent state. We just do crash consistent, file system consistent, application consistent. And the way that we do it, and this is why it is adaptive, is that we always try to capture the best state possible. Which means that if we can capture an application consistent snapshot, this is what we will do. If we cannot, we will fail back to a file system consistent snapshot. And if we cannot, we'll do a crash consistent snapshot. So there are some conditions or requirements in order to achieve one or the other. So to be application consistent, we have to use our agent, if you will. We'll call that a connector, and the name is the Rubrik backup service. So it has to be installed and registered with the software. This is something that can be 100% automated. You don't have to do this manually, of course, for every virtual machine. It can be 100% automated. And you have to, of course, have within the virtual machines VSS-aware applications that provide VSS writers. Okay. To achieve the file system consistent state, you also have you don't have to have the Rubrik backup service, but you achieve that state if the service is not installed or not available through the network or not registered within our software. And in any other condition, it will be a crash consistent state, just like if you pull the plug behind the physical server, for example. Okay. So about the Rubrik backup service, like I said, it's a very lightweight connector. It's self-managing and updating, so you don't have to deal with management, not really deployment, not upgrading. It does upgrade on its own. It does work whether you have UAC enabled or not, so that's a very good point. And we actually overcome the VSS timeout issues that I was talking about, which is a critical point to have a successful application consistent backup. And we do provide a VSS provider, which is why we don't have these timeout issues, basically. And it's still, from VMware perspective, it's still like an agentless backup because the agent does not transport the data to the target storage. It actually goes through the vSphere storage API's data protection, which is using NBDSSL. And with this, I guess that you can go out in the wild and be backup heroes.